That's where it's got. You're close to him. Maybe he'll listen to you.
You know, I talk to him. He's a tough guy to talk to. You know him.
He has no choice. He has no choice. These are the higher-ups.
Well, he's a higher up, too. I mean, no.
Not like this. You know that. Oh, come on, Frank. If they can whack a president, they can whack a president of a union. You know it, and I know it.
In this gripping documentary, we delve into the unraveling saga of Johnny Roselli, a member of the infamous Chicago outfit, whose life became a cautionary tale of betrayal, desperation, and ultimate demise. Roselli, once a shadowy figure in organized crime, found himself under immense pressure, facing tax evasion charges, immigration battles, and relentless media scrutiny. The looming threat of deportation terrified him. Roselli, a man who had thrived in America's underworld, dreaded a forced return to Sicily. In his desperation, he weaponized his secrets, offering up explosive information in exchange for protection and a semblance of stability. The story begins with the FBI and CIA locked in a dangerous dance. The FBI, in a bold move, leaked files implicating the CIA in collusion with organized crime, particularly in assassination plots targeting Fidel Castro. The revelations painted a damning picture. The American government, once seen as a bastion of democracy, was crumbling under the weight of its own secrets. High-profile deaths, figures like Thomas Dewey, Allen Dulles, and J. Edgar Hoover, marked the end of an era. The assassinations of John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King Jr., along with a series of botched attempts on other leaders, left the American public doubting the very institutions they once trusted. This was a time when the press, fiercely independent and difficult to control, was exposing corruption on a scale never seen before. Unlike today's tightly controlled media landscape, the 1950s through the 1970s saw an unstoppable flood of stories, from local papers to national headlines. Journalists, though occasionally targeted by organized crime or covert agencies, persisted in their pursuit of the truth. Figures like Jack Anderson, using sources within the criminal underworld, revealed explosive details. However, much of the information was piecemeal and unreliable, often drawing tenuous connections between the CIA's covert actions and organized crime's shadowy dealings. One such connection revolved around Fidel Castro, the revolutionary leader of Cuba. Leaked stories began implicating the CIA and organized crime in numerous assassination plots against Castro, linking these efforts to the same figures embroiled in the Watergate scandal and the Bay of Pigs invasion. The web of corruption extended to Robert Kennedy's involvement in Operation Mongoose, Richard Nixon's ties to Cuban exile groups, and the CIA's manipulation of organized crime to achieve their covert aims. Amid this chaos, high-profile mobsters like Sam Giancana and Jimmy Hoffa found themselves under intense scrutiny. Hoffa, still fighting to reclaim control of the Teamsters, threatened to leak damning secrets about the Mafia's collusion with government agencies. Giancana, called to testify, was silenced before he could reveal too much. Roselli, too, became entangled in this deadly game. His decision to cooperate with investigators and implicate Santo Trafficante by name in CIA-backed assassination attempts on Castro sealed his fate. By early 1975, a torrent of articles began flooding the media, exposing connections between organized crime, political figures, and covert operations. These revelations shook the foundations of power, instilling fear even in the most untouchable mob bosses, men like Carlos Marcello, Santo Trafficante, Russell Bufalino, and Carlo Gambino's inner circle, who were transitioning into white-collar crime. Yet, despite their efforts to maintain control, the old guard was slipping, their secrets bleeding into public view. This series begins in January 1975, tracing the events that led to Roselli's death in 1976. His fatal mistake was implicating Trafficante as a translator in a CIA meeting discussing Castro's assassination. When Roselli's loose lips reached the wrong ears, the decision was made. Roselli had to go. What you're about to witness is the chilling chain of events that unraveled the lives of men like Roselli, Giancana, and Hoffa, culminating in a cascade of revelations that forever changed the way Americans viewed their government and the underworld it secretly partnered with. By the dawn of 1975, the American public was inundated with a steady stream of bombshell reports, each more unsettling than the last. What emerged wasn't merely the sordid underbelly of organized crime or covert government operations, it was the alarming intersection of the two. The headlines didn't just turn heads, they tore open a festering wound of mistrust in institutions, exposing the lengths to which shadowy alliances would go to preserve power. In the wake of Watergate's seismic fallout, the Central Intelligence Agency found itself at the center of scrutiny, accused of activities that veered far beyond its charter. January began with whispers that snowballed into a torrent of accusations. On Sunday, January 12th, the Chicago Tribune broke the story wide open. The CIA, an entity shrouded in Cold War mystique, had allegedly spied on American citizens, aligning itself with foreign police units, intelligence agencies, and even local law enforcement. This was no ordinary surveillance. According to insiders, the agency had kept dossiers on a staggering number of Americans, from political activists like Jane Fonda to government officials such as Representative Mendel Rivers. The files, stored across various CIA divisions, highlighted an intricate web of illegal domestic activities, painting a picture of an agency that had lost its boundaries in the name of national security. At the heart of these revelations lay figures like James Angleton, the CIA's enigmatic counterintelligence chief. Angleton was described as a Cold War relic, a man who could take an inch of thread and make a whole suit of it. His fervent paranoia and disdain for détente left a trail of controversial decisions, from overseeing domestic surveillance to fostering covert operations. Critics contended that his outdated worldview led to systemic abuses, including partnerships with foreign police and clandestine infiltration of civil rights and anti-war movements. The story gained darker undertones when connections to organized crime surfaced. Chief among them was John Roselli, a reputed member of the Chicago outfit. Roselli's testimony before investigators painted a chilling picture. He claimed to have acted as a go-between for the CIA and the Mafia in a plot to assassinate Fidel Castro. Roselli identified Robert Maheu, a former FBI agent and aide to Howard Hughes, as his contact. According to Roselli, Maheu approached him with a proposition allegedly originating from the CIA itself, a contract hit on Castro. Roselli's tale was more than an anecdote. It was a revelation that linked America's premier intelligence agency to the criminal underworld. These allegations, combined with the CIA's history of rogue domestic operations, sparked outrage. Critics cited incidents like the CIA's assistance to Watergate conspirator Howard Hunt, including recruiting operatives for the infamous burglary at Daniel Ellsberg's psychiatrist's office. The CIA's shadowy practices weren't limited to espionage. The Chicago Tribune detailed a covert division, the Domestic Operations Division, operating in at least 20 American cities. Officially tasked with recruiting Americans for foreign intelligence work, this division's unofficial activities blurred ethical lines. From staging break-ins at foreign embassies to planting propaganda in the press, the division symbolized the agency's willingness to flout its own rules. Meanwhile, another layer of intrigue unfolded in Washington, where President Gerald Ford established a commission led by Vice President Nelson Rockefeller to investigate the CIA. Among its members was David Berlin, a former counsel to the Warren Commission, whose appointment added weight to the investigation. As these revelations unfolded, they painted a grim tableau. an intelligence community embroiled in a murky nexus of crime, politics, and covert operations. The American people, already disillusioned by Watergate, now grappled with the knowledge that institutions sworn to protect them had betrayed their trust. By month's end, one thing was clear. The revelations of January 1975 weren't just a glimpse into history, they were a reckoning. Each new detail chipped away at the facade of invulnerability surrounding powerful organizations, leaving a raw and unvarnished truth. The CIA, the Mafia, and the shadowy figures that bridged their worlds were no longer the stuff of conspiracy theories. They were real, and their secrets were spilling into the light. The chapter of January 1975 wasn't merely a story of scandals. It was a harbinger of further revelations to come, as America braced itself for the full scope of its hidden past to unravel. As the chill of winter gave way to spring, the year 1975 became increasingly dominated by revelations that brought the covert operations of the CIA into stark relief. By March, the scrutiny of the CIA's murky history reached a fever pitch as investigations threatened to expose its alleged involvement in assassination plots, targeting some of the most influential figures of the mid-20th century. For decades, rumors swirled around the CIA's clandestine activities, but it was in March 1975 that the public began to grasp the scale of its entanglements. Reports hinted at assassination plots involving Fidel Castro of Cuba, Rafael Trujillo of the Dominican Republic, and Patrice Lumumba of Congo. On a side note, Rafael Trujillo was a pivotal figure in the tangled web of organized crime and covert operations. It was said that Carlos Marcello, after his exile to Guatemala, found his way to the Dominican Republic, where Trujillo personally facilitated his return to America. Trujillo arranged a secure passage aboard a CIA plane, ensuring Marcello's discreet re-entry. However, when Robert Kennedy uncovered Trujillo's deep connections to the criminal underworld, including ties to Santo Traficante, Carlos Marcello, Meyer Lansky, Joe Stasi of the Havana mob, Charlie White, and certain far-right elements within the CIA, he acted swiftly. By the end of May, Trujillo was assassinated, his life cut short by what many believe to have been a calculated political hit. When Carlos Marcello finally resurfaced in America, he arranged a meeting with Santo Traficante. It was there that Traficante shared the grim news. Trujillo had been assassinated. Traficante, armed with intelligence from his own CIA informants, revealed a stunning allegation that Robert Kennedy himself had ordered the hit. While the CIA continued to deny any direct policy of orchestrating assassinations, sources from within the government revealed a different story. Shadowy acknowledgements that in some cases, individuals connected to the CIA may have acted to eliminate foreign leaders. The specter of these plots had haunted the halls of power for years. One particularly vivid moment came when former President Lyndon Johnson reportedly declared in 1964, upon assuming office, "We had been operating a damned murder incorporated in the Caribbean." His words, recalled in a 1973 Atlantic Monthly article, encapsulated the growing unease about the CIA's unchecked power and its flirtation with the moral and legal boundaries of Cold War strategy. Fidel Castro's survival had become legendary, but reports from the Nevada State Journal in early March revived the chilling details of how close the CIA came to ending his life. The first documented attempt on Castro's life was intricately tied to the ill-fated Bay of Pigs invasion. To weaken Castro's grip on power, the CIA believed eliminating him would demoralize his supporters and pave the way for a successful overthrow. Enter Johnny Roselli, a suave and enigmatic figure with deep ties to the Chicago outfit. Known for his role in managing the Mafia's Las Vegas operations, Roselli was recruited by the CIA to oversee the assassination missions. Roselli's connection added a sinister layer to the operation, as his underworld ties provided the agency with deniability should the plot fail. The assassination attempt was a page out of a spy thriller. Poison capsules, meticulously engineered to dissolve without trace, were smuggled into Cuba. Roselli arranged for a contact close to Castro's chef to slip the deadly toxin into the dictator's food. For a brief moment in 1961, it seemed the plan had succeeded. Reports out of Havana claimed Castro was gravely ill. Yet the Cuban leader recovered, just in time to lead the defense against the Bay of Pigs invasion in April. Undeterred, the CIA persisted. The poison was reformulated, this time in triple-strength doses. And assassination teams armed with rifles and explosives made daring midnight missions into Cuba. One team, according to reports, even reached a rooftop within range of Castro. Yet, despite ingenuity and persistence, each attempt failed. The cases of Rafael Trujillo and Patrice Lumumba were equally shrouded in ambiguity. Trujillo, a dictator who had ruled the Dominican Republic for 3 decades, was assassinated in May 1961. While the CIA officially denied involvement, sources suggested that individuals in contact with agency officers played a role. In Congo, the story of Patrice Lumumba's assassination took on an air of Cold War intrigue. As the left-leaning leader of a newly independent nation, Lumumba's alignment with Moscow made him a target of intense scrutiny. According to reports, his assassination was discussed within the CIA, though the agency claimed no direct action was taken. Lumumba's death, attributed to the secessionist Katanga government, remained a stain on the legacy of international diplomacy. By March 1975, the weight of these revelations had placed the CIA at the center of multiple investigations. The Presidential Commission chaired by Vice President Nelson Rockefeller faced mounting pressure to expand its inquiry into domestic surveillance to include these allegations of international assassinations. The implications were profound. If non-agency individuals had been recruited within the United States for such missions, the plots could be construed as domestic conspiracies. The timing couldn't have been worse for Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, who was delicately negotiating the possibility of reopening diplomatic relations with Cuba. Public revelations of CIA assassination plots threatened to derail these efforts, reigniting tensions with a nation that had endured years of U.S. embargoes and covert hostility. Central to these revelations was Johnny Roselli, who remained characteristically tight-lipped about his role in the plots. His lawyer, Leslie Sher, deflected inquiries, stating, "Johnny will not talk to you about Cuba under any circumstances. He will not even talk to me about it." Roselli's refusal to discuss his involvement added to his mystique and the lingering question of how far the CIA's collusion with organized crime had gone. As the month drew to a close, the picture that emerged was one of a nation grappling with the darker chapters of its history. The CIA's alleged involvement in assassination plots, combined with its domestic surveillance scandals, painted an agency that had operated with impunity under the guise of national security. The investigations of 1975 weren't merely about uncovering wrongdoing. They were a reckoning with the ethical boundaries of power and the shadowy alliances forged in the pursuit of Cold War dominance. By the spring of 1975, the shadow of Cold War intrigue enveloped the United States, as revelations about the CIA's covert assassination plots and ties to organized crime continued to dominate headlines. The focus shifted from whispers of conspiracy to documented evidence implicating the highest levels of government, including the Kennedy administration, in clandestine plans to eliminate Fidel Castro, the defiant Cuban leader who had long been a thorn in America's side. The Rockefeller Commission, led by Vice President Nelson Rockefeller, emerged as the focal point of the investigations. Initially tasked with probing the CIA's domestic surveillance activities, the commission soon found itself entangled in a much darker narrative. The agency's alleged involvement in assassination plots targeting Castro, Dominican dictator Rafael Trujillo, and Congolese leader Patrice Lumumba. At the heart of the inquiry was David Bellin, the Commission's executive director and a former counsel to the Warren Commission, who demanded transparency from the CIA regarding its role in the plots. Balin's persistence reflected a broader concern. Had the agency withheld critical information from the Warren Commission to conceal its connections to attempts on Castro's life? Such a revelation could potentially reshape the narrative surrounding President John F. Kennedy's assassination, fueling speculation that his murder was a retaliatory act orchestrated by Castro. One of the most explosive discoveries came in May 1975, when documents surfaced confirming a chilling collaboration between the CIA and organized crime. The files revealed that, in 1961, the agency recruited two notorious mobsters, Sam Giancana of the Chicago outfit and Johnny Roselli, a charismatic underworld figure with ties to Las Vegas, to orchestrate Castro's assassination. The operation read like the script of a spy thriller. The CIA supplied poison capsules designed to dissolve undetected in Castro's food or drink, while Roselli and Giancana used their criminal networks to facilitate the plot. The mob had its own reasons for cooperating. Castro's rise to power had decimated the lucrative Havana casino operations controlled by American organized crime. Despite their shared interests, the operation was fraught with mishaps and failures. The poison never reached Castro. Assassination teams armed with rifles and explosives failed to get close to him, and the conspirators vanished into obscurity. Yet the revelations of the Mafia's involvement raised troubling questions about the CIA's willingness to align itself with criminal elements to achieve its objectives. As the Commission dug deeper, evidence suggested that the Kennedy administration itself may have sanctioned efforts to eliminate Castro. Minutes from an August 1962 meeting of senior administration officials revealed discussions about removing the Cuban leader. This meeting, attended by Attorney General Robert Kennedy, Secretary of State Dean Rusk, CIA Director John McCone, and National Security Advisor McGeorge Bundy, marked a turning point in the narrative. According to sources, the meeting led to the development of Operation Mongoose, a covert initiative designed to destabilize Castro's regime. A subsequent memorandum, authored by counterinsurgency expert Major General Edward Lansdale, directed the CIA to draft contingency plans for elimination, a euphemism for assassination. Robert Kennedy's involvement was particularly contentious. While some aides claimed he ordered the original Mafia-linked plot turned off after learning of it in 1962, others suggested he remained deeply invested in efforts to remove Castro, driven by the humiliation of the Bay of Pigs fiasco. The implications of these revelations were staggering. Former FBI Director Hoover reportedly warned Attorney General Robert Kennedy that the Mafia's involvement in the plot placed the U.S. government at risk of blackmail. Hoover feared that mob figures like Giancana and Roselli could use their knowledge of the operation as leverage to evade prosecution, a fear that was not unfounded. Giancana avoided significant legal consequences, while Roselli later revealed his CIA connections in a bid for leniency. Meanwhile, the Rockefeller Commission faced growing pressure to unravel the full extent of the CIA's involvement. The Commission's investigation uncovered additional documents linking high-ranking Kennedy administration officials to assassination planning. These revelations complicated the narrative, suggesting that efforts to eliminate Castro extended beyond the CIA and into the broader apparatus of government. The intertwining of the CIA's assassination plots with the Kennedy administration's policy decisions cast a shadow over the legacy of Camelot. As documents surfaced implicating senior officials in discussions about removing Castro, the public grappled with the moral and legal implications of these actions. For Robert Kennedy, the revelations were particularly damaging. Once celebrated as a champion of justice, his association with assassination plots tarnished his reputation, raising questions about the ethical boundaries of his pursuit of Cold War objectives. The lingering suspicion that the Kennedy brothers' actions indirectly contributed to John Kennedy's assassination added a tragic irony to the narrative. By the end of May 1975, the nation found itself at a crossroads. The Rockefeller Commission's findings, coupled with ongoing Senate investigations led by Senator Frank Church, exposed a government willing to operate in the shadows, unbound by legal or moral constraints. The CIA's collaboration with the Mafia, its covert plots to eliminate foreign leaders, and its potential concealment of critical information from the Warren Commission painted a picture of an agency and a government mired in secrecy and scandal. By the summer of 1975, the slow drip of revelations about the CIA's shadowy alliances and assassination plots reached a dramatic crescendo. The investigation into the agency's sordid past had become a theater of death and deceit, with the murder of mobster Sam Giancana standing as the bloody exclamation point on a tale already bursting with intrigue. In June, new details emerged of a 1961 CIA plan to eliminate Fidel Castro, his brother Raúl Castro, and Che Guevara in a single operation. This triple assassination plot, conceived in the waning days of the Eisenhower administration, represented the agency's belief that Cuba's unification under these three leaders posed an existential threat to U.S. interests. At the center of this sinister scheme were Sam Giancana and Johnny Roselli, Mafia figures enlisted by the CIA to carry out the murders. Through Giancana's connections, the agency reached an assassin within Cuba, armed him with poison designed to mimic natural death, and arranged for the attempt to coincide with the Bay of Pigs invasion. Yet, like so many of the CIA's efforts against Castro, the plan collapsed. The assassin failed to gain proximity to his targets, and the invasion itself ended in catastrophic failure. On June 19th, the mob world erupted in shock with the gangland-style murder of Sam Giancana. Found in the basement kitchen of his Oak Park, Illinois home, Giancana's body bore 6 bullet wounds, 1 in the mouth and 5 in the neck, execution style. It was a brutal message, likely from his own mob associates, silencing him before he could testify before the Senate Intelligence Committee about his role in the CIA's assassination plots. Giancana had been a paradoxical figure, straddling the criminal underworld and the corridors of U.S. intelligence. His early years as a ruthless enforcer in Chicago's West Side gave way to a lavish lifestyle fueled by gambling rackets and international intrigue. Known for his fiery temper and flair for the extravagant, Giancana had once dated singer Phyllis McGuire and allegedly used CIA resources to spy on her. Yet his entanglement with the agency, particularly in its attempts to assassinate Castro, marked a chilling intersection of organized crime and government machinations. Russell Bufalino's words carried the weight of unyielding authority. "They kill bosses too," he said, his voice heavy with implication. He wasn't just speaking in generalities. He was pointing to the brutal realities of power within their world. The recent murder of Tommy Ryan Eboli, the head of the Genovese crime family, loomed large in his warning. So too did the violent ends of Sam Giancana, Joe Colombo, and Joe Gallo, men whose connections to organized crime, from the bloody streets of New York to the shadowy dealings in Cuba, had marked them for assassination. It was the evening of Frank Sheeran's appreciation dinner, just weeks after Giancana's slaying, and Bufalino's message couldn't have been clearer. He was warning Sheeran to make sure his close friend, Jimmy Hoffa, understood the stakes. The higher-ups in organized crime, men like Carlos Marcello, Santo Traficante, and the powerful heads of the Gambino and Genovese families, demanded silence. Secrets were the currency of survival, and now more than ever, those secrets had to be protected. At the heart of this cloak of secrecy was the shadowy connection between Hoffa, Tony Provenzano, and the Nixon administration. Hoffa and Provenzano had each contributed $500,000 in cash, a staggering total of $1 million that was funneled to Nixon's people. That money was used to bail out the burglars involved in the Watergate scandal, men who had been sent to do the unthinkable. The payoff was an insurance policy, ensuring Nixon's compliance. In time, Nixon signed the pardon that freed Hoffa from prison. But this arrangement along with the money trail, was a ticking time bomb the Mafia needed to keep buried. The same tangled web of figures involved in Watergate had their roots in earlier covert operations, including the Bay of Pigs invasion. Now, with Hoffa free, his relentless ambition and refusal to keep quiet were testing the patience of the Mafia's most powerful figures, particularly Carlos Marcello. Hoffa's recklessness posed a threat not only to himself but to the entire underworld network. Meanwhile, whispers of betrayal were surfacing. Johnny Roselli, once a trusted figure in organized crime, was leaking damning stories to journalist Jack Anderson, exposing plots to take out Fidel Castro and implicating the Mafia in the assassination of President John Kennedy. The tension reached its breaking point after Giancana's assassination. A few weeks later, Hoffa vanished without a trace. Just days after Hoffa's disappearance, John Martino, a casino operative with deep ties to the CIA, Carlos Marcello, and Santo Traficante, was quietly murdered. His death, though overshadowed by the firestorm surrounding Hoffa and Giancana, was another thread in the unraveling tapestry of secrecy. Together, their disappearances ignited a crisis the Mafia never wanted to face, one that threatened to expose the delicate balance of power and alliances they had fought so hard to maintain. Bufalino's warning had been a lifeline, a grim reminder that to survive, one had to play by the rules of the old supreme heads of organized crime. Jimmy Hoffa, in his defiance, had chosen otherwise, and the consequences were felt everywhere. With Giancana's death, the spotlight shifted to his longtime associate, Johnny Roselli, who was subpoenaed to testify before the Senate Intelligence Committee. Unlike Giancana, Roselli cooperated, revealing harrowing details of the CIA-Mafia partnership. Roselli described 6 separate attempts to assassinate Castro, involving poison pills, sniper teams, and explosives. In one operation, poison capsules were smuggled into Cuba with the intent of slipping them into Castro's food. Another attempt saw Roselli personally delivering an assassination team to the Cuban coast via speedboat. Each mission, however, ended in failure, the operatives either disappearing or failing to get close enough to their target. Roselli's testimony also implicated former CIA operatives William Harvey and James O'Connell as architects of the plots. According to Roselli, the plans were marked by a combination of desperation and ingenuity, with the agency resorting to untraceable poisons and covert alliances to achieve its goals. The murder of Giancana and Roselli's revelations cast a dark shadow over the CIA's operations, highlighting the agency's willingness to collaborate with criminals to achieve its objectives. The Senate Intelligence Committee, led by figures like Senator John Tower, pressed forward, unearthing a trove of documents linking the CIA to plots against Castro and other foreign leaders. Meanwhile, CIA Director William Colby attempted to defend the agency's reputation, warning that public exposure of its clandestine activities could undermine national security. His pleas for discretion were met with skepticism, as investigators like Bella Abzug lambasted the agency for overstepping its bounds and engaging in domestic surveillance. As the summer unfolded, the intertwining fates of the CIA, the Mafia, and the Kennedys came into sharper focus. The revelations painted a grim portrait of an era where the lines between right and wrong blurred in the pursuit of Cold War supremacy. The CIA's alliance with organized crime to assassinate Castro was not just a moral failing, but a strategic disaster, setting a precedent for unchecked power and shadowy conspiracies. The deaths of Giancana and others left questions unanswered, and the testimony of figures like Roselli provided only partial clarity. Yet, the events of 1975 forced the nation to confront its past, exposing the price of secrecy and the dangers of a government operating in the shadows. In the end, the investigations of 1975 were not merely about accountability. They were about reckoning with the legacy of a system that had allowed such alliances to flourish. For a generation scarred by Vietnam, Watergate, and now the CIA's covert wars, The revelations were a reminder that even in the darkest corners of power, the truth has a way of coming to light. By late June 1975, the veil over one of the most controversial chapters in American intelligence history began to lift. From secret assassination plots to alliances with mobsters, the revelations painted a grim tableau of Cold War desperation, betrayal, and shadowy alliances that blurred the lines between patriotism and criminality. John Roselli, the enigmatic underworld figure with ties to the Chicago outfit, took center stage in the unfolding drama. During his closed-door testimony before the Senate Intelligence Committee, Roselli confirmed his role in 6 attempts to assassinate Fidel Castro, ranging from poison pellets to sniper squads. The plots, which spanned the early 1960s, were orchestrated by the CIA and involved an unlikely cast of players, including Robert Maheu, former aide to billionaire Howard Hughes, and William Harvey, a CIA operative known for his ruthlessness. Roselli recounted dramatic moments, such as Maheu unveiling a briefcase stuffed with $310,000 and lethal poison capsules. The plan? Infiltrate Castro's inner circle with operatives who would slip the poison into the Cuban leader's food. The capsules, designed to dissolve within days and mimic natural causes, symbolized the CIA's obsession with eliminating Castro while maintaining plausible deniability. Yet, despite meticulous planning, each attempt failed. The final squad, Roselli revealed, made it as far as a Havana rooftop before being apprehended. By March 1963, the project was abandoned, a testament to the formidable resilience of Castro's regime and the sheer complexity of covert operations. While Roselli's revelations captivated Washington, the murder of his associate, Sam Giancana, cast a shadow over the proceedings. Giancana, once the ruthless kingpin of Chicago's underworld, was gunned down in his Oak Park home on June 19, 1975, just days before he was scheduled to testify before the Senate. The execution-style killing, 6 shots, including one in the mouth, carried the unmistakable signature of a mob hit. Investigators speculated that Giancana was silenced by his own associates, fearful that his testimony could implicate them in the CIA's assassination plots or other crimes. Giancana's death underscored the high stakes of the investigations. As a figure who bridged the criminal and political worlds, his murder symbolized the lengths to which those in the shadows would go to protect their secrets. The Senate Intelligence Committee, chaired by Senator Frank Church, struggled with the dilemma of how much to reveal to the public. Church initially championed transparency, arguing that Americans deserved to know the truth. However, by late June, he voiced reservations about broadcasting the sordid details of the CIA-Mafia partnership, fearing it would undermine public trust and national security. The reluctance to fully disclose the truth mirrored the complex moral calculus that had guided these covert operations. The CIA's collaboration with organized crime, its involvement in assassination plots, and its willingness to operate outside the law highlighted the dark underbelly of Cold War strategy. The revelations also exposed stark contradictions within the U.S. government. While Attorney General Robert Kennedy waged an aggressive war against organized crime, the CIA, operating under the aegis of the Kennedy White House, sought the Mafia's help to eliminate Castro. This paradox embodied the competing priorities of a nation grappling with existential threats abroad and domestic challenges at home. Former Secretary of State Dean Rusk's words resonated amid the revelations. "There's a very dirty war being fought in the back alleys of the world." That war, as it turned out, was not confined to foreign battlefields, but had seeped into the fabric of American governance. As June 1975 drew to a close, the investigations into the CIA's activities left an indelible mark on the nation's psyche. The testimonies of figures like Roselli and the murder of Giancana underscored the human cost of secrecy and the fragility of trust in institutions. The CIA's reliance on the Mafia to achieve its ends, coupled with the agency's clandestine operations, forced the nation to confront uncomfortable truths about the compromises made in the name of security. These revelations weren't merely about the past. They were a cautionary tale for the future, a stark reminder of the perils of unchecked power and the shadows it casts. In the end, June 1975 wasn't just a chapter in the story of the CIA and the Mafia. It was a reckoning with the legacy of a nation that had ventured too far into the darkness in its quest to defend the light. The explosive revelations surrounding the Central Intelligence Agency's covert operations reached new heights on July 2, 1975, with the release of a shocking interview. Robert Cunningham, a former CIA official, broke his silence and made startling claims about the role of Robert Kennedy, the late Attorney General, in the agency's assassination attempts against foreign leaders, particularly Fidel Castro. Cunningham's statements, marking the first time a former CIA official publicly tied Robert Kennedy to the infamous plots, have ignited a firestorm of controversy. Cunningham's revelations suggest that William Harvey, the CIA's contact man for the Mafia figures involved in the assassination attempts, was not just a rogue agent operating independently. Rather, Cunningham confirmed that Harvey worked directly for Robert Kennedy during the height of the agency's covert operations against Cuba. Harvey, who had led the CIA's activities against Cuba in the early 1960s, was reportedly cut out of the agency's standard command structure and instead reported directly to the Attorney General, despite the usual oversight by the CIA's Deputy Director of Plans, Richard Helms. While Cunningham could not provide direct evidence that Robert Kennedy personally ordered the assassination attempts, he was unequivocal in his belief that Kennedy had authorized them. "I don't think there was any ambiguity about the chain of command," Cunningham stated, emphasizing that it was well known among the fairly senior guys in the clandestine services that Bobby Kennedy was calling the shots, particularly regarding Cuba and the operations involving Bill Harvey. Cunningham also recalled that Harvey was openly frustrated with his assignment and referred to Kennedy as his cross to bear, often calling him an idiot. The revelations about Harvey's direct ties to Robert Kennedy and the involvement of Mafia, figures like Johnny Roselli and the slain Sam Giancana in the assassination plots, have added fuel to the growing suspicions surrounding the Kennedy administration's covert actions. The Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, led by Senator Frank Church, has already uncovered evidence that links Roselli and Giancana to CIA operations aimed at eliminating Castro. According to reports, both men were recruited in the final months of the Eisenhower administration, with Harvey serving as their direct CIA contact during the Kennedy years. Cunningham's testimony provides further insight into the clandestine relationships between high-level political figures and the CIA. He stated that Harvey's office had a direct phone line to Robert Kennedy, a line that had been checked for wiretaps to ensure the utmost secrecy. Harvey's position outside the CIA's normal command structure raised alarm among some officials, who questioned the degree of control exercised by the White House over these covert operations. Not everyone, however, shared Cunningham's clear stance on Robert Kennedy's role. Other former CIA officials, like John Bross, a former controller and deputy director of the CIA, offered a more measured perspective. Bross confirmed that the White House had a direct and continuing interest in all matters concerning Cuba, and that groups had been established that were specifically responsive to the White House. However, when asked about Harvey's direct reporting to Robert Kennedy, Bross admitted, "I think there's something in that," suggesting that there may have been a closer relationship than previously acknowledged. Vice President Nelson Rockefeller and retired Major General Edward G. Lansdale had both previously hinted at the Kennedy administration's involvement in assassination plots, with Lansdale stating that he had been tasked in late 1961 to draft plans to depose Fidel Castro. However, Cunningham's testimony marks the first time that a former CIA officer has publicly stated that Robert Kennedy was directly involved in the operations to eliminate foreign leaders. Cunningham's decision to speak out was fueled by a deep frustration with what he saw as attempts by politicians, particularly Senator Church, to shift the responsibility for the assassination plots away from political leaders and onto professional intelligence officers. Cunningham, who had worked within the CIA's domestic operations branch in the early 1960s, expressed disillusionment with the agency's growing bureaucracy and declining morale among its officers. He also took issue with the agency's history of opposition to assassinations, accusing political leaders of pushing the CIA into such operations. The interview marked a significant moment in the ongoing investigation into the CIA's covert operations during the Kennedy administration. As Cunningham's allegations reverberate through the political and intelligence communities, the questions surrounding Robert Kennedy's involvement in the CIA's assassination plots are only intensifying. Whether or not these plots were authorized at the highest levels remains unclear, but the growing body of evidence raises serious questions about the role of the Kennedy administration in orchestrating these deadly, covert operations. The release of this testimony has undoubtedly opened a new chapter in the search for accountability regarding the CIA's darkest secrets. As summer deepened, the revelations about the CIA's covert activities and its shadowy alliances grew increasingly damning. By July 1975, the narrative shifted from the Mafia's role in assassination attempts against Fidel Castro to the direct involvement of the Kennedy administration, particularly Robert Kennedy, in directing plans under the now infamous Operation Mongoose. The practice of political assassination, steeped in history, became a focal point in Senator Frank Church's ongoing investigations. Church, chairing the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, declared with conviction, "Ours is not a wicked country, and we cannot abide a wicked government." Yet, Church's investigations revealed that moral lines were blurred, and methods employed in the name of national security often strayed far from ethical governance. The Church Committee centered its inquiry on 6 pivotal figures, including former CIA directors and operatives, as well as Mafia associate John Roselli and Robert Maheu, the enigmatic ex-FBI agent who acted as a liaison between the CIA and organized crime. The question loomed: how deeply had U.S. leadership sanctioned or participated in assassination plots? Retired Major General Edward Lansdale's candid remarks to the Washington Star deepened the controversy. Lansdale identified Robert Kennedy as the official who, in 1962, directed him to oversee CIA efforts to get rid of Fidel Castro. While Lansdale avoided the word assassination, he admitted that the directive included the full spectrum of plans, from fomenting revolution to eliminating the Cuban leader. Lansdale's comments revealed the Kennedy administration's frustration with the CIA following the Bay of Pigs fiasco. Disillusioned with the agency's leadership, Robert Kennedy bypassed the traditional chain of command, relaying instructions directly to Lansdale and CIA operative William Harvey. The move reflected the Kennedys' growing resolve to confront Castro decisively amid mounting Cold War tensions. The centerpiece of these efforts was Operation Mongoose, an elaborate program launched in August 1962 to destabilize the Cuban regime. Overseen by Robert Kennedy, the operation brought together a high-level group of officials, including Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, Secretary of State Dean Rusk, National Security Advisor McGeorge Bundy, and CIA Director John McCone. One critical document, a memo allegedly authored by Lansdale after an August 10, 1962 meeting, outlined contingency plans for Castro's assassination. Although Lansdale later denied using explicit language like assassination, the memo's contents reportedly authorized the CIA to explore all feasible means of eliminating the Cuban leader. As Lansdale deflected specifics about the CIA's collaboration with organized crime, Mafia figure John Roselli stepped forward to fill in the gaps. Roselli's testimony revealed how the agency had turned to mobsters like him and Sam Giancana to carry out assassination attempts. The Mafia, whose Havana casino empire had been destroyed by Castro's revolution, was a willing partner. Roselli recounted efforts to poison Castro using capsules supplied by the CIA, as well as sniper teams deployed to Cuba. Yet, despite their shared objectives, the operations were plagued by failure, with operatives captured or disappearing before they could complete their missions. By early July, Senator Church faced a difficult choice. While he initially advocated for transparency, declaring that Americans deserved to know the full truth, he later tempered his stance. Church opposed broadcasting the details of CIA-Mafia collaboration, citing concerns about national security and the potential global fallout of exposing such sordid episodes. This shift in tone reflected the broader challenges of the investigation. The compartmentalization of CIA operations, coupled with the deaths of key witnesses like mobster Richard Kane and CIA operative Desmond Fitzgerald, made it difficult to establish a complete picture. Moreover, the practice of plausible deniability meant that direct orders from presidents or high-ranking officials rarely left a paper trail. The revelations about Operation Mongoose and the CIA's covert activities highlighted a stark contradiction. While the Kennedy administration publicly waged war against organized crime, it privately enlisted the Mafia to achieve its geopolitical aims. This duality tarnished the legacy of Camelot, forcing Americans to confront the moral compromises made in the name of national security. As Lansdale himself admitted, we explored every means of removing the Castro threat. Yet the cost of these explorations extended far beyond Cuba, implicating the highest echelons of government and eroding public trust in America's institutions. By July 1975, the story of the CIA, the Mafia, and Operation Mongoose had evolved into a broader reckoning with the nature of power and the ethics of governance. The investigations underscored a fundamental tension. How can a free society defend itself against existential threats without undermining its own moral foundation? The testimony of figures like Lansdale and Roselli provided a glimpse into the shadowy world of Cold War espionage, but the full truth remained elusive. As the summer wore on, the nation braced itself for further revelations, knowing that the answers uncovered might only deepen the questions surrounding the CIA's legacy and America's role on the global stage. Senator Frank Church's investigation into the CIA painted a grim portrait of an agency that had often acted beyond oversight, likened by Church to a rogue elephant on a rampage. While the CIA's stated mission was to protect American interests, its alliances with organized crime in anti-Castro operations revealed a willingness to embrace morally and legally dubious methods. Among the most controversial revelations were the CIA's recruitment of mobsters like Johnny Roselli and Sam Giancana to orchestrate Fidel Castro's assassination. These plots, dating back to the early 1960s, involved everything from poison pills to sniper squads, often facilitated by intermediaries such as Robert Maheu, a Howard Hughes associate with ties to both the CIA and the Mafia. In July, Roselli testified before the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, confirming his role in multiple failed attempts to assassinate Castro. He described operations involving Cuban exile teams trained in guerrilla warfare, poison capsules delivered in briefcases, and sniper missions targeting Castro's public appearances. Roselli's testimony illuminated the dark nexus between organized crime and U.S. intelligence agencies during the Cold War. The shadow of President John Kennedy's assassination loomed heavily over the Church Committee's inquiries. Speculation persisted that the CIA's anti-Castro plots may have inadvertently set in motion events leading to Kennedy's murder in Dallas. Columnist Jack Anderson and researcher Peter Dale Scott both posed the same haunting question. Did the CIA's covert operations against Castro backfire, implicating figures tied to these plots in the president's assassination? Independent investigations increasingly cast doubt on the Warren Commission's portrayal of Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby as isolated actors. Both men's lives intersected with broader networks of organized crime, intelligence, and anti-Castro activities. Oswald distributed pro-Castro leaflets, bearing the address of a CIA-connected Cuban exile group, while Ruby maintained links to mob figures involved in Havana's pre-revolutionary casino empire. Ruby's ties to Louis McWillie, a Havana casino operator with connections to the Mafia, placed him squarely within the nexus of organized crime and anti-Castro intrigue. FBI files further linked McWillie to Norman Rothman, another figure implicated in CIA assassination plots. These connections suggested that Ruby, like Oswald, was enmeshed in a larger web of geopolitical machinations. While much of the focus rested on the CIA, scrutiny extended to the Kennedy administration itself. Retired General Edward Lansdale, a key figure in Operation Mongoose, testified that Robert Kennedy personally directed him to draft plans for removing Castro. Though Lansdale avoided using the word assassination, his testimony highlighted the administration's deep involvement in anti-Castro efforts following the Bay of Pigs debacle. Operation Mongoose, a covert initiative spearheaded by Robert Kennedy, aimed to destabilize Castro's regime through sabotage, propaganda, and assassination. Documents uncovered by the Rockefeller Commission suggested that the operation operated with minimal oversight, relying on CIA operatives and assets like Roselli and Giancana. The CIA's anti-Castro operations didn't just intersect with the Kennedy assassination, they also surfaced in the Watergate scandal. Figures like E. Howard Hunt and Frank Sturgis, both tied to anti-Castro activities, were central to the infamous break-in. Hunt, who had proposed assassinating Castro as early as 1960, collaborated with Robert Mayhew and Roselli on covert missions that laid the groundwork for later controversies. President Richard Nixon's recorded conversations during the Watergate cover-up revealed his anxiety about the CIA's Cuban connections. In one exchange, Nixon warned that revelations about the agency's anti-Castro plots could blow the whole Bay of Pigs thing, exposing the CIA and its use of organized crime to public scrutiny. The Mafia's role in CIA operations also brought to light its enduring influence in American politics and organized crime. Figures like Sam Giancana and Carlos Marcello not only participated in covert plots, but also wielded significant power within the underworld. Marcello, deported by Robert Kennedy in 1961, was smuggled back into the US by operatives tied to the CIA, illustrating the complex interplay between government agencies and organized crime. While the CIA relied on the Mafia to carry out its most covert missions, it also found itself at odds with the Justice Department's crackdown on organized crime. Robert Kennedy's relentless pursuit of mob figures like Giancana and Jimmy Hoffa created tensions that further complicated the agency's clandestine operations. In a groundbreaking admission, Richard Bissell, a former chief of clandestine services for the Central Intelligence Agency, has confirmed his personal approval of the agency's collaboration with Mafia figures in an audacious plot to assassinate Cuban Premier Fidel Castro in 1960. This is the first time a high-ranking CIA official has openly acknowledged such an arrangement, shining a spotlight on the murky intersection of U.S. intelligence operations and organized crime during the Cold War. Bissell's statement revealed that Alan W. Dulles, the CIA director at the time, was kept informed of the Mafia connection, suggesting the agency's highest echelons were complicit. The plan was conceived during the final months of the Eisenhower administration as part of broader efforts to destabilize Castro's regime. The assassination attempts were to be synchronized with the Bay of Pigs invasion, a covert operation that would later become a notorious failure under the Kennedy administration. The plot involved hiring underworld figures like Sam Giancana and John Roselli. These men, connected to America's most powerful crime syndicates, were tasked with delivering a fatal blow to Castro's leadership, using methods ranging from poison capsules to targeted shootings. The CIA approached Giancana and Roselli through Robert Mayhew, a former FBI agent and close associate of billionaire Howard Hughes. Mayhew, granted immunity from prosecution, testified that his role was to act as an intermediary between the CIA and the mob. Poison capsules were developed and entrusted to Roselli, who worked on the logistics of infiltrating Castro's inner circle. Maheu insisted that no attempt was ever carried out to his knowledge, as the plan required a green light that, according to him, never came. However, Roselli's testimony suggested otherwise, as he claimed involvement in at least 6 assassination attempts targeting Castro during the early 1960s. Colonel Sheffield Edwards, then head of CIA security, was instrumental in orchestrating the collaboration. However, Edwards' actions raised significant ethical concerns within the agency. Lawrence Houston, the CIA's general counsel, disclosed that he first learned of the Mafia connection in 1962 and immediately insisted that Attorney General Robert Kennedy be briefed on the matter. Kennedy, already waging a fierce war against organized crime, was reportedly infuriated by the revelations, viewing the partnership as a betrayal of the Justice Department's anti-mafia efforts. Despite his objections, the plot continued, illustrating the tenuous balance between national security imperatives and legal boundaries. Bissell acknowledged that Edwards reported directly to Dulles on the Mafia collaboration, with Bissell's full awareness and consent. Yet he distanced himself from the day-to-day oversight, framing his role as one of strategic approval rather than operational management. His admission underscores the fragmented nature of CIA operations during this period, where compartmentalization often shielded decision-makers from direct accountability. Adding to the revelations, Senator George McGovern announced that Fidel Castro had provided documentation detailing 24 assassination attempts allegedly orchestrated by the CIA. McGovern passed the materials to the Senate Select Intelligence Committee, emphasizing the need to investigate these claims. If true, McGovern declared, the CIA has engaged in the most shocking, murderous, and un-American behavior against the leaders of a neighboring state. August 1975 was a month that threatened to strip away the veils of secrecy surrounding the criminal underworld, exposing connections that no one had dared to fully understand. The powerful, silent figures of the Mafia, the men who controlled cities from the shadows, were suddenly thrust into the harsh light of public scrutiny. It began with an unsettling disappearance, but soon the scope of the revelations grew far darker, stretching from the streets of Michigan to the murky corners of Washington, D.C., and beyond, where organized crime had entangled itself with the very forces meant to protect the nation. At precisely 2 p.m. on July 30th, 1975, an event occurred that sent ripples through the fabric of America's Union power. James Riddle Hoffa, the once feared president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, disappeared without a trace. Known for his iron grip on union politics and his ongoing battle for power within the Teamsters, Hoffa had long been a man in conflict, not only with his colleagues, but with forces much darker. Local 299, where Hoffa's influence was particularly strong, had been a hotbed of violence, its members subjected to shootings, firebombings, and arson. The tension in the air had been palpable for years, and it was only a matter of time before Hoffa would become entangled in it. Hoffa was last seen outside the Matchus Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township, Michigan, awaiting a meeting that would never happen. His car, a 1974 Pontiac, was found in the adjacent parking lot, locked, unscathed, and abandoned. Lieutenant Grenier of the Bloomfield Township Police Department hesitated to confirm foul play, but the unanswered questions were mounting. Hoffa had placed a call to his wife after his scheduled meeting failed to occur, but by the time she reached the restaurant, he was gone, leaving behind only the eerie silence of an unsolved mystery. As Hoffa's family and friends, including his son James Hoffa Jr., anxiously awaited word, speculation ran wild. Hal DeLong, a longtime friend and spokesman for Local 299, tried to downplay the situation, citing that it wasn't uncommon for union officials to disappear for days, especially when they were involved in deep political dealings. Yet Hoffa's sudden disappearance was unlike anything that had come before, leaving behind only the cold truth of a man who had made too many enemies within the Union and beyond. The Hoffa mystery wasn't the only story making waves. On the same day that Hoffa disappeared, a far darker tale was being unraveled in Washington, D.C. The shadows of the Mafia reached into the highest echelons of the U.S. government, and the public was about to learn just how deep the connections ran. In a dramatic turn of events, Robert Maheu, a former FBI agent turned aide to the reclusive millionaire Howard Hughes, revealed startling details of a Central Intelligence Agency operation that had entangled mobsters in an attempt to assassinate Cuban Premier Fidel Castro. Speaking before the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, Maheu described how he had been recruited by the CIA in 1960 to assist in an assassination plot aimed at eliminating the Cuban leader. He had reached out to notorious Mafia figures such as Johnny Roselli and Sam Giancana, men with deep ties to Cuba and the power to strike at Castro. The CIA's plan was chilling: poison Castro's food and take him out without ever being traced. Maheu, though claiming no financial compensation for his role in the plot, spoke candidly about his involvement, admitting his discomfort with the assignment. Yet he had no choice but to cooperate, his allegiance to the agency outweighing any personal qualms. The revelation was explosive. For years, rumors had swirled about Mafia-CIA collaborations, but now the truth was finally emerging. In his testimony, Maheu described how, in early 1961, CIA officials had shown him poison capsules meant for Castro, but despite everything being in place, the operation never received the final go signal to proceed. It was a plot that fizzled before it could even begin, leaving behind only questions about the true extent of the CIA's dealings with organized crime. As if the revelations weren't enough, the saga of Johnny Roselli, the Mafia figure tied to the CIA's assassination plot, took another dramatic turn. Roselli, born in southern Italy, was a man whose loyalty to the Mafia had never wavered. Now, he found himself facing deportation back to Italy as the federal government sought to remove him from the United States. But Roselli had a card to play: his American war record, which he planned to use in his defense, hoping to convince authorities of his good character. However, the Department of Defense refused to release his honorable discharge papers, casting further suspicion on Roselli's actions. It was yet another chapter in the tangled web of Mafia connections to American institutions, a tale of betrayal and manipulation that was far from over. On a cold October evening in 1975, a secret too dark to remain hidden was finally dragged into the light. The Central Intelligence Agency's shadowy ties to the Mafia were exposed in a revelation that would rewrite the narrative of the Bay of Pigs invasion. According to sources, the CIA had been prepared to pay the underworld up to $100,000 for the assassination of Cuban Premier Fidel Castro. But in an unexpected twist, notorious figures like Sam Giancana and Johnny Roselli, who held the keys to the Mafia's cold, calculating power, rejected the offer, choosing instead to carry out the mission for free. What followed was a botched attempt that left the CIA with a fraction of its intended payout, less than $10,000 spent, all for a plan that would never come to fruition. But as the truth emerged, the damage was done, leaving an indelible mark on the tangled relationships between the government and the underworld. As November 21, 1975, cast a chill across the nation, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence unleashed a report that would reverberate through the corridors of power for years to come. The document, a 347-page investigation, painted a stark picture of the Central Intelligence Agency's covert operations, spanning 3 presidencies: Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson. The report revealed that the CIA had engaged in a wide array of assassination plots, attempting to eliminate leaders such as Fidel Castro and Patrice Lumumba. The details of these operations, including bizarre methods like poison cigars, explosive seashells, and hallucinogenic chemicals, were nothing short of chilling. While the report did not explicitly point the finger at any specific president for authorizing these attempts, it noted that these plots could only have been approved at the highest levels. The committee, despite opposition from President Gerald Ford and Republican members such as Senator Barry Goldwater and Vice Chairman John Tower, moved ahead with the publication. Their stance was clear. The American public had a right to know the dark truths hidden within the CIA's history. The investigation uncovered startling facts about the CIA's involvement in assassination attempts that stretched from the early 1960s into the 1970s. The committee's findings highlighted at least 8 failed attempts on Castro's life, and the CIA's support for insurgents who killed other foreign leaders. Notably, the CIA provided support to insurgents who assassinated Dominican Republic dictator Rafael Trujillo in 1961, South Vietnamese President Ngo Dinh Diem and his brother in 1963, and Chile's General René Schneider in 1970. The committee also found some evidence of CIA involvement in unsuccessful plots against Indonesian President Sukarno and Haitian leader François Papa Doc Duvalier. Despite this, the report noted that no foreign leaders were successfully assassinated as a result of U.S. operations. The report acknowledged that the assassination plots were initiated under the auspices of the CIA, but the committee could not definitively determine whether the presidents themselves authorized them. The most significant findings pointed to the central role that key officials, including CIA Director Allen Dulles and Defense Secretary Robert McNamara, played in these covert schemes. The committee's conclusions made it clear that while specific authorization remained murky, the responsibility for these covert operations ultimately rested with the highest levels of the U.S. government. It suggested that Presidents Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson must have been aware of these schemes and should bear responsibility for the actions of their subordinates. In particular, the committee concluded that Eisenhower had reasonably authorized the plot against Lumumba, while suggesting that Richard Nixon, though not implicated in any specific assassination plots, was linked to actions in Chile. The report's release was a crucial step in confronting the shadowy activities of the CIA, highlighting the need for accountability within the U.S. government. Despite attempts by Ford to block publication, the report's release set the stage for a deeper examination of the moral and legal implications of government-sanctioned assassination attempts. Among the most bizarre revelations were the specifics of the assassination plots aimed at Castro. The CIA, in its pursuit to eliminate the Cuban leader, concocted a series of outrageous schemes. These included poison-laced cigars, contaminated diving suits, and hallucinogenic substances to disorient Castro. One plan even involved planting an explosive seashell at a popular diving location frequented by Castro. Though none of these plans were successfully executed, their existence revealed the lengths to which the CIA had gone in its pursuit of Castro's life. As the report's findings shocked the public, CIA Director William Colby attempted a final defense of secrecy. He sought to redact 12 names from the document, arguing that exposing these individuals would endanger their safety and that of their families. These individuals, Colby claimed, had been involved in covert operations and could face reprisals from unstable or extremist groups. Despite Colby's pleas, Chairman Frank Church stood firm, refusing to omit the names. These figures, Church argued, were too integral to the story of the CIA's covert operations to be concealed. The debate over the redactions underscored the broader conflict between transparency and national security. The committee's decision to publish the names was a decisive moment in the fight for accountability, revealing a tangled web of political and criminal operations that had long been kept in the shadows. The committee's report painted a grim picture of a government willing to engage in morally questionable and illegal activities to further its political goals. The assassination attempts against Castro, Lumumba, and other leaders were a reminder of the lengths to which the US had gone in its efforts to assert control over foreign affairs. As the report made clear, While no foreign leaders had been killed by these CIA plots, the implications of such operations were far-reaching. The revelation that these covert efforts had been sanctioned by the highest levels of the US government forced the nation to reckon with its dark history. The report's final word was both a condemnation and a call to action. The United States must learn from its past and ensure that such operations are never repeated. With the veil of secrecy lifted, the nation stood at a crossroads. The truth had been exposed, and the public was forced to confront the moral and ethical implications of the actions taken by its leaders in the name of national security. The chilling legacy of these covert operations would continue to haunt American politics, casting a long shadow over the future of its foreign policy and intelligence community. Central Intelligence Agency. Director William Colby attempted to convince the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence to remove 12 names from its assassination report, arguing that doing so would protect those individuals and their families from potential reprisals by unstable or extremist groups. Although the committee agreed to delete 20 other names, Chairman Frank Church, a Democrat from Idaho, insisted that the 12 names Colby sought to exclude were inseparably involved in the events and had to remain in the report. Church publicly identified 10 of the 12 individuals during a press briefing. Henry Dearborn, former deputy chief of the United States Embassy in the Dominican Republic. The report indicated that Dearborn maintained close contact with dissidents who eventually assassinated Dominican dictator Rafael Trujillo, and that he provided them with weapons. J.C. King, head of the CIA's Western Hemisphere Division. William Harvey, former head of Task Force W, the Central Intelligence Agency's operation during President John F. Kennedy's administration aimed at ousting Cuban Premier Fidel Castro. Robert Maheu, a former CIA employee and later a top executive with the Howard Hughes Organization. Maheu was involved in recruiting American underworld figures to carry out assassination plots against Castro. John Roselli, a reputed organized crime figure with gambling connections in Las Vegas. Santos Traficante, a reputed Mafia boss who controlled pre-Castro Cuba's underworld. General Roberto Vio, a Chilean general whose associates were involved in the 1970 kidnapping and assassination of General René Schneider, Commander-in-Chief of Chile's armed forces. General Camilo Valenzuela, another Chilean general whose involvement mirrored that of Vio in the Schneider case. Bronson Tweedy, chief of the CIA's African division during the plot to poison Congolese Premier Patrice Lumumba. Lucien Conin, a CIA operative in Saigon who maintained contact with forces that eventually overthrew and assassinated South Vietnamese Premier Ngo Dinh Diem in 1963. The missing 2 names. The remaining 2 names included in the report were not disclosed by Chairman Church during the briefing. His office provided no explanation for withholding their identities. On a brisk day in Washington, the wheels of power were turning, but not in the direction one might expect. It was the start of the 60s, and behind the closed doors of the White House, Hoover was sounding an ominous warning to President John Kennedy. The subject of the conversation, Kennedy's connection to a woman linked to the highest echelons of the underworld, would prove to be more than just an idle concern. Hoover's warning about Judith Campbell, whose ties to Mafia figures Sam Giancana and John Roselli ran deep, marked a turning point in the delicate dance between politics, organized crime, and national intelligence. One day after warning President John Kennedy about his association with a woman linked to 2 top underworld figures, former FBI Director Hoover took the first steps to prevent prosecution of the men involved. According to the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, Hoover's actions followed a secret closed-door session with Kennedy at the White House. During the meeting, Hoover detailed the potential dangers of Kennedy's connection with the woman, marking the 2nd time he had addressed the issue with the president. Kennedy's association with Judith Campbell. The Scripps Howard News Service revealed this week that Kennedy had been associated with the woman, identified as Judith Campbell, for over a year. During this time, Kennedy's brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy, had launched an aggressive campaign against organized crime in the early days of the Kennedy administration. Although the Senate committee, tasked with investigating American intelligence activities and alleged assassination plots, did not name the woman directly, it referred to her as a friend who was also closely linked to hoodlums Sam Giancana and John Roselli. The report did not specify the gender of the friend, but Scripps Howard reported that Kennedy and Campbell met at various locations around the country, with arrangements for some visits made by Kennedy's personal secretary. Judith Campbell was connected to Chicago Mafia leader Sam Giancana and organized crime figure John Roselli, both of whom were recruited by the Central Intelligence Agency to participate in a plot to assassinate Cuban Premier Fidel Castro. The Senate committee's report revealed that, in exchange for their involvement, the Central Intelligence Agency provided personal assistance to Giancana. One example cited in the report involved CIA personnel aiding Giancana and Roselli in setting up a listening device in Las Vegas to determine if one of Giancana's girlfriends was being unfaithful. Local police discovered the device and traced it back to Giancana and Roselli. Hoover's knowledge and actions. Federal charges for violating wiretapping laws were considered against Giancana and Roselli. However, informed sources indicated that Hoover, who had become aware of Kennedy's association with Campbell through field agents, intervened to prevent prosecution. Hoover's actions, along with the revelation of Kennedy's connection to Campbell, raised significant questions about the intersection of politics, organized crime, and intelligence operations during this turbulent period. By the fall of 1975, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence had become a battleground of secrets, leaks, and revelations that threatened to unravel the delicate fabric of the U.S. government's covert operations. The committee's investigation into the Central Intelligence Agency's use of organized crime figures to eliminate foreign threats had already exposed deeply troubling alliances. But it was a discovery about the late President John F. Kennedy, an aspect of his personal life that had long been shrouded in mystery, that became one of the most sensational stories to emerge. At the heart of the committee's inquiry was a woman whose name was only whispered in the shadows, Judith Campbell. Once a socialite with a mysterious aura, Campbell's connections to key Mafia figures would soon draw the scrutiny of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Her alleged relationships with Chicago mob boss Sam Giancana and others involved in assassination plots against Cuban Premier Fidel Castro put the late president at the center of an explosive scandal. The truth, buried beneath layers of covert operations and personal ties, was beginning to surface. The committee's investigation into Kennedy's connections with Campbell, which had been kept secret for months, was eventually exposed. FBI documents, handed directly to the president by Director J. Edgar Hoover, revealed that Kennedy had frequent interactions with Campbell. According to the findings, she had made approximately 70 phone calls to Kennedy's White House office between 1961 and 1962, some of which had been traced to Giancana's Chicago residence. The proximity of these calls to the CIA's assassination plot only deepened the intrigue. Though Campbell initially testified under secrecy before the committee, denying any knowledge of the plot against Castro, her connections to figures like Giancana and John Roselli were undeniable. While some members of the committee accepted her claims that her relationship with Kennedy was purely social, others, especially Hoover, found it difficult to dismiss the potential risks associated with such a high-profile association. Hoover's memos to both the White House and Attorney General Robert Kennedy highlighted his alarm over the situation, stressing the danger of allowing someone with Mafia ties such close access to the president. Tensions within the Senate committee reached a boiling point when Scripps Howard News Service broke the story about Kennedy's connection to Campbell. The leak sent shockwaves through Washington as the public learned of the president's interactions with a woman who had ties to underworld figures involved in CIA assassination plots. The committee, which had worked tirelessly to protect this sensitive information, now found itself caught in the midst of a political firestorm. Chairman Frank Church of Idaho was quick to demand that committee members and staff sign affidavits asserting they had not leaked any information about Kennedy's relationship with Campbell. The pressure to find the source of the leak was intense, as members feared the consequences of a betrayal of trust. Senator Gary Hart, a leading Democrat on the committee, led the charge to uncover the person responsible, insisting that it was crucial for Congress to maintain its credibility in handling sensitive information. The committee's final report downplayed the significance of Kennedy's relationship with Campbell, deeming it unrelated to the CIA's attempts to use Giancana and Roselli to assassinate Castro. But the damage was done. The Scripps Howard story, published just days before the committee's report, exposed the explosive nature of the inquiry. It was clear that behind closed doors, the committee had been grappling with far more than the public was ever meant to know. The revelations surrounding Kennedy's relationship with Campbell were not the only shockwaves to emerge. The death of Sam Giancana, shot to death in his Oak Park, Illinois, home in June 1975, only served to further complicate matters. Giancana had been subpoenaed by the committee just weeks before his death, and his murder raised questions about whether he had been silenced to protect the secrets of the Mafia's involvement with the CIA. As the committee continued its investigation, the layers of corruption, deceit, and betrayal began to pile up. It was becoming increasingly clear that the lines between government operations and organized crime were far more entangled than anyone had dared to admit. As 1975 neared its end, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence found itself tangled in a web of intrigue, personal secrets, and political maneuvering that threatened to cast long shadows over the legacy of John Kennedy and the very institution of American government. While the committee maintained a public front of unity, behind closed doors, the senators were locked in fierce debates over how to handle the explosive revelations in their final report on CIA assassination plots. The question that divided them: to what extent were President Kennedy and his brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy, complicit in the covert operations involving Mafia figures? At the heart of the disagreement was the issue of how much to implicate the Kennedys in the CIA's failed assassination attempts on Cuban Premier Fidel Castro. Chairman Frank Church, a Democrat from Idaho, believed the evidence was too tenuous to draw direct connections between the Kennedy administration and the plots. Meanwhile, Senator Barry Goldwater, a Republican from Arizona, pushed hard for a conclusion that suggested the Kennedys must have been aware of the operations. This ideological clash held up the committee's report for weeks, with some Democrats even pushing to omit any mention of Judith Campbell, a woman with Mafia ties who had frequent contact with President Kennedy. Campbell, a volunteer for Kennedy's campaign, had made numerous phone calls to the White House during 1961 and 1962. FBI logs revealed that some of these calls came from the home of the infamous mobster Sam Giancana, a key figure in the CIA's attempts to kill Castro. Campbell was also linked to another Mafia figure, Johnny Roselli, who, along with Giancana, was involved in the assassination plot. The committee was divided on whether to include her name, as her relationship with Kennedy had been discreet and was only exposed due to the investigation into the CIA's use of organized crime figures. Despite some senators wishing to keep the matter hidden, the majority agreed that the Campbell connection should be acknowledged in the report, though her name was left out. The affair was cited as potential evidence of a cover-up, reflecting the deep political undercurrents that shaped the committee's investigation. As the year came to a close, the Senate Intelligence Committee's handling of the Kennedy Mafia connection and the ongoing saga of the Nixon legacy underscored the complex interplay between personal lives, political agendas, and the secrets that could no longer be kept hidden. By mid-December, the controversy surrounding the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence had reached new heights. Senators Frank Church and Gary Hart, feeling the pressure of an explosive secret that could unravel the Kennedy legacy, were pushing committee staffers to sign affidavits swearing they were not the source of the leaks. This covert operation within the Senate was born out of a report that had all the makings of a political bombshell, revealing the deep ties between President John F. Kennedy, the Mafia, and the Central Intelligence Agency's assassination attempts against Fidel Castro. At the heart of the Senate Intelligence Committee's report was a stunning revelation. Evidence that a close friend of President Kennedy had frequent contact with both the president and notorious Mafia figures John Roselli and Sam Giancana, the very mobsters enlisted by the CIA to plot Castro's assassination. This friend was a woman who had connections to both the president and the underworld, a link that would soon cause a political firestorm. According to the committee's findings, White House telephone logs showed 70 instances of calls between the president and this woman between 1960 and 1962, calls that were made from places like Giancana's home and a Washington hotel where Mafia figures often met. The committee was careful in its handling of this matter, but the evidence was undeniable. The woman, identified as Judith Campbell, had long been a fixture in both the White House and the Mafia's orbit, frequenting the circles of Giancana and Roselli. Despite her testimony denying knowledge of the CIA's assassination plot, the details surrounding her interactions with these powerful figures left many questions unanswered. What was her role in these connections? Why had the president maintained such close contact with someone so deeply tied to the criminal underworld? The explosive nature of this revelation was compounded by the involvement of FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, who had been monitoring Giancana and Roselli as part of the Kennedy administration's war on organized crime. In early 1962, Hoover alerted both Robert Kennedy and White House aide Kenneth O'Donnell to the alarming connections between the president's friend and the Mafia. A subsequent meeting between Hoover and President Kennedy led to the abrupt termination of the relationship between Kennedy and Campbell, an intervention that raised more questions than it answered. However, the investigation didn't stop there. Investigative reporters Dan Thomason and Tim Wingard uncovered further details that pushed this story into the public sphere. According to their sources, which included FBI documents, Campbell was not just a bystander in this tangled web. She had been at the center of a dangerous liaison between the nation's leader and the Mafia, and her association with Giancana and Roselli had far-reaching implications for the CIA's actions against Castro. The situation became even more complicated when one considers the timing. Giancana, the very man who had facilitated the assassination attempts, was killed just before he could testify before the Senate. The question lingered. Was this murder a cover-up, silencing the Mafia's side of the story? And more troubling still, why had Hoover's warnings about the president's connections to the Mafia not raised more alarms about the CIA's covert operations? The intertwining of these events raised chilling questions. How had the Mafia's connections with the White House affected the trajectory of political decisions? Why did the Kennedy administration appear to ignore Hoover's warnings, especially given the CIA's recruitment of mobsters for a high-stakes assassination mission? The fact that the president's own friend had been involved in these covert operations, while the FBI was listening in on the entire affair, was a bridge too far for many to ignore. As the investigation deepened, the Church Committee sought to bury the matter, but the damage was already done. The revelations had opened Pandora's box of questions, not just about Kennedy's involvement, but about the broader intersection of government, the Mafia, and the CIA. The committee's attempts at a cover-up only fueled the suspicion that there were more secrets yet to be uncovered. This tangled web of deception had far-reaching consequences beyond the assassination plots. One significant after-effect of the relationship between the Kennedys and Hoover's revelations about Mafia ties was the FBI's subsequent involvement in wiretapping and surveillance, most notably on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. after the March 1962 meeting between Hoover and President Kennedy, in which Hoover laid out the evidence of the Mafia connections. The Kennedys' acquiescence to Hoover's demands became more evident. The implications of this relationship may explain the FBI's aggressive tactics, including the surveillance of King, a key civil rights leader at the time. The political ramifications of these events were staggering, as the lines between organized crime, the government, and covert intelligence operations blurred. With Giancana silenced and the Church Committee attempting to downplay the connections, investigative reporters such as Thomason and Wingard shone a light on the murky dealings that had so long remained in the shadows. As December 1975 drew to a close, the political world was rocked by the growing revelations surrounding President John F. Kennedy, the Mafia, and a trail of violence that linked the highest levels of government with organized crime. At the heart of this mounting controversy was the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, whose investigation into the CIA's failed attempts to assassinate Fidel Castro had unexpectedly drawn the Kennedys into a scandal of extraordinary proportions. The committee had long struggled with how to handle the evidence of President Kennedy's connection to Mafia figures such as John Roselli and Sam Giancana. While Chairman Frank Church and others tried to downplay the significance of the president's association with these men, the evidence was damning. The committee's report reluctantly acknowledged a link between Kennedy and a close friend who had frequent contact with the president from 1960 to 1962. This friend, identified as Judith Campbell, was deeply connected to both Roselli and Giancana, the very mobsters enlisted by the CIA to orchestrate Castro's assassination. Despite her testimony denying knowledge of the assassination plots, the fact that Campbell had been in frequent contact with the president during a time when Giancana and Roselli were involved in such covert operations was hard to ignore. The White House telephone logs revealed 70 instances of phone contact between the president and Campbell, adding fuel to the fire. This connection, however tenuous, raised serious questions about what the president knew and when he knew it. But the story did not end with the committee's report. While the committee struggled to keep its findings under wraps, a more sinister event occurred in June 1975. The murder of Sam Giancana. The Chicago mob boss, who had been a key figure in the CIA's assassination plot against Castro, was shot dead in his Oak Park, Illinois, home just days before he was scheduled to testify before the Church Committee. Giancana's death sent shockwaves through Washington, but the response from the Senate was notably indifferent. No federal investigation was launched into the murder, and local authorities were left to handle the case with limited resources. This silence from both the federal government and the Church Committee raised suspicions. Critics argued that Giancana's murder was a calculated move to silence the one man who could potentially expose the Mafia's links to the CIA and the White House. Given Giancana's prominent role in the assassination plots, his murder just before he was to testify seemed too convenient to be mere coincidence. As the story of Giancana's death continued to unfold, the questions surrounding the Church Committee's response grew louder. Senator Church and others had been quick to dismiss the murder as just another Mafia hit. Yet the timing and circumstances suggested that something much darker was at play. Giancana had been on the verge of revealing crucial information about the president's connections to organized crime, making his death all the more suspicious. Local police and federal authorities appeared uninterested in pursuing the case with the urgency it demanded. FBI agents, who had been monitoring Giancana's activities as part of their war on organized crime, did not pursue the murder with the same zeal. Meanwhile, the Church Committee, instead of investigating the matter further, focused on downplaying the connection between the Kennedys and the Mafia. The cover-up of Giancana's murder seemed to fit into a larger pattern of evasion. The Senate's reluctance to fully investigate the implications of the CIA's relationship with the Mafia and the potential involvement of the White House pointed to a troubling nexus of power, corruption, and silence. The public and political outcry surrounding Giancana's murder demanded action. Despite the Church Committee's attempts to bury the matter, the significance of the case cannot be ignored. If the Senate was unwilling to fully confront the scandal, it was time to appoint a special prosecutor with the power to investigate the connections between the White House, the Mafia, and the circumstances surrounding Giancana's murder. Without such an investigation, the truth would remain hidden, and the potential scandal would fade into the shadows, buried under political maneuvering and media indifference. The failure to hold those responsible accountable would ensure that the web of deceit surrounding the Kennedy administration, the CIA, and organized crime would remain intact. As 1975 drew to a close, the public's fascination with the mysterious connections between President John Kennedy and the Mafia reached new heights. Judith Campbell Exner, the woman at the center of a scandal that had consumed Washington, held a highly anticipated news conference in San Diego, where she sought to clarify her relationship with the late president. In her statement, Exner, now 41, vehemently denied any involvement in the alleged conspiratorial plots that had linked her to both Kennedy and Mafia figures like Sam, Momo Giancana, and Johnny Roselli. She acknowledged a close, personal relationship with the president, but stopped short of confirming or denying claims that she had been his lover. "I will not allow the committee to implicate me in these absurd plots," she stated, as she rejected the narrative suggested by some of the Senate Intelligence Committee's findings. Exner, a striking brunette, confirmed that her relationship with Kennedy had spanned 54 weeks, beginning in February 1960, when they met in Las Vegas. She recalled visiting the White House more than 16 or 20 times during this period. Despite the controversy surrounding her associations with the Mafia figures involved in the CIA's assassination attempts against Fidel Castro, Exner denied being a link between the underworld and the White House, especially in relation to the assassination plots. The Senate Intelligence Committee's extensive report, which detailed CIA assassination attempts, had revealed that Exner and Kennedy had exchanged 70 phone calls between 1961 and 1962. The report identified Exner as a close friend of the president, but her full identity had only recently been made public. Exner made it clear she disagreed with the committee's insinuations, emphasizing that her relationship with Kennedy was personal and not part of any covert schemes. She further claimed that her relationship had been known to key members of Kennedy's staff, including his secretary, Evelyn Lincoln, and special assistant, Kenny O'Donnell. Exner dismissed any suggestions that she had been involved in Kennedy's political campaigns, or that her connection to the president was anything less than personal. "These statements are entirely contrived," she said, pointing to Lincoln's characterization of her as merely a campaign worker. Exner's relationship with Mafia figures Giancana and Roselli was also a matter of intense public interest. While she admitted to having personal relationships with both men, she continued to deny any involvement in their criminal activities or any role in facilitating communications between them and Kennedy. Her comments in the press conference sought to distance herself from the increasingly complicated web of associations that had brought her into the spotlight. Exner made it clear that while the Senate Intelligence Committee had focused on her connections to the assassination plots, she would not allow herself to be implicated in a conspiracy. "My relationship with Jack Kennedy," she declared, "was of a close, personal nature and did not involve conspiratorial shenanigans of any kind." Exner's comments left many questions unanswered, especially regarding the exact nature of her relationship with the president and her interactions with the Mafia figures tied to the CIA's operations. She confirmed that full documentation of her relationships with both Kennedy and the underworld figures had been transcribed and stored, awaiting release at a later time. However, until those facts were made available, the story of her involvement and its connection to the larger tale of CIA plots against Castro remained far from settled. Her claims and the Senate Intelligence Committee's findings were just the latest chapter in an unfolding saga that had captured the public's imagination. As new details emerged, the lines between personal affairs, political intrigue, and covert operations continued to blur, making it clear that this was far more than just a tale of romance and scandal. It was a complex narrative with deep political and historical implications. The story of Judith Campbell Exner, JFK, and the Mafia was far from over. The murders of Sam Giancana, Jimmy Hoffa, and John Martino were not random acts of violence. They were calculated moves to prevent any re-examination of the Kennedy assassination. These men, once trusted within the inner circles of organized crime, had become liabilities. At that volatile moment, anyone holding on to dangerous secrets faced the harsh reality of an old Louisiana saying, "3 men can keep a secret if 2 of them are dead." A cleanup operation became not just prudent, it became essential. The looming threat of the CIA admitting its clandestine collaborations with organized crime only added fuel to the fire. Such an admission would blow open a Pandora's box of revelations, implicating men like Carlos Marcello, Santo Trafficante, and others in scandals that could destroy them. Meanwhile, Russell Bufalino's name began surfacing in connection with various covert operations, yet he managed to keep himself just outside the spotlight. His knack for avoiding direct scrutiny was as much a matter of strategy as it was luck. Hoffa's death, however, was inevitable. He had become a dangerous wildcard, a volatile figure whose ambitions to regain control of the Teamsters threatened to expose everyone. If Hoffa had succeeded in reclaiming power, his testimony would have been unavoidable during the House Select Committee hearings on assassinations. Bound by law to testify, Hoffa's loose tongue posed a risk too great for the Mafia to ignore. Even Russell Bufalino, who had long shielded him, could no longer provide cover. When Bufalino's name appeared in Time magazine, Hoffa's days were numbered. Weeks later, Hoffa disappeared. John Martino followed a similar fate, vanishing under suspicious circumstances as other key figures began turning up dead. The pressure mounted when the House Select Committee called in Johnny Roselli to testify. One senator issued a chilling remark that sealed Roselli's fate. "If someone wanted you dead, you'd already be gone. You might as well start talking." For a fleeting moment, Roselli let his guard slip, revealing that his translator during CIA meetings was none other than Santo Trafficante. A few weeks later, Roselli was found dead. Part 2 of this story will unravel Roselli's death, starting from January 1976 and tracing the chain of events that led to the discovery of his body, a body that was never meant to be found. Roselli's corpse surfaced in an oil drum floating off the coast of Miami, a botched hit that exposed more than anyone intended. His death and the secrets it uncovered had ripple effects that shook the underworld. Sam Giancana's murder, in contrast, was designed to send a clear message. The shots across his mouth symbolized a brutal warning. Loose lips are silenced permanently. Hoffa disappeared without a trace, but Roselli's body surfacing broke the Mafia's code of invisibility. Part 2 will reveal the grisly details of how Roselli ended up in that oil drum and explore the devastating consequences of these murders for the Mafia and the secrets they sought to bury.